Hey everyone, it's Matt, and today I will be talking to you about all of the video games that I played in the second half of 2020. As some of you may know, I did 2 previous videos for 2020 video games I played, and those were for the first and second quarters, but I decided to do just one video for the third and fourth quarters because I didn't really play much new in the third quarter, so this video encompasses everything from July through December. Anyway, let's just get right into it. I hope you'll enjoy hearing me ramble a bit about what I thought of these games. So, here we go. So, the first game I played in the second half of 2020 was Yoshi's Crafted World for the Nintendo Switch. Yoshi. And chances are, if you're familiar at all with Yoshi games, you kind of know what to expect from this one. It's a game where you play as Yoshi, and you are exploring a world made out of arts and crafts materials. Previous Yoshi games have had themes to them in terms of their art style, like Yoshi's Woolly World. That was a world where basically everything was made out of yarn and wool. This one is arts and craft materials like cardboard and paper and so on. And it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's just a pretty simple, easy, relaxing platformer game where you run around as Yoshi and throw eggs at things and try and collect all the little objects. And this game is pretty good. I mean, it's not the best game ever made by any means. It's nothing really mind-blowing or spectacular. It's just a simple idea executed pretty well. And I'd say if you're looking for a challenge, this game would not be it. It's a pretty easy game. It's more for it would be suitable for children, or if you just want to kick back and relax and just play a game where you can succeed without putting in much effort, which sometimes I like to do. That's why I got this. And yeah, I think it succeeds pretty well at that. There are, of course, a ton of collectibles and things that you can get, and little challenges that are optional and so on, so you can definitely make the game harder if you want to dive deeper into it, but this isn't exactly Yoshi Dark Souls or anything like that. Either way, if that sounds like your type of game, I think it's worth a try. Maybe not at full price because it's kind of short and simple, but if you see it on sale and you're interested, I'd probably recommend it. Pretty good game. So next, I played a game that I don't have a physical version of because as far as I know, there are no physical versions of it. But it is a game that you probably know I played if you've been around my channel lately. And that's because I made a video on it. And that game was Fall Guys, which is a sort of party game / battle royale where you play as one of 60 colorful bean-shaped people running around a bunch of obstacle courses in an attempt to be the last one standing. And I think this game is pretty fun. I had a lot of fun playing it, and it's a good time. It's easy to get into, but hard to master. But as you may know if you've been around the Fall Guys scene since it came out, it seems that the novelty of the game kind of wears off quickly. I had a ton of fun with it for a few days, and then just kind of stopped caring after I won once or twice. And I feel like for a lot of people, their time with the game was pretty similar. It's a game that is a lot of fun to play for a certain period of time, but then kind of the shallowness of it all reveals itself, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It never marketed itself as the deepest game ever or anything like that, but it does mean that it kind of feels samey after a few hours, and there aren't really many different ways you can approach most of the game, so once you've seen most of the minigames a few times, you've kind of seen what you're going to get, so I'd say it's a very fun game, and if you're interested in it, it's definitely worth trying, but if you're concerned about the longevity of it, maybe wait for a sale. But yeah, pretty fun game, and notably the only Battle Royale game that I've ever gotten a win in. That said, I have never played, well, not never, I've not played many other Battle Royale games. I played a little bit of Fortnite and so on, but not enough for a win, so that is Fall Guys. Alright, so next I got a collection of 3 fantastic 3D platformers. Super Mario 3D All-Stars. I do want to note that if you don't already know this, and you want to get this game, it's going to be out of print. I think at the end of this March. Nintendo made it a limited time release, so you cannot buy it, at least a new copy, after that time. Not even digitally, which I think is really stupid, but anyway, the reason I bring this up is because the next game I played in the second half of 2020 was Super Mario Galaxy on this collection. I did play a little bit of the other 2 games, but I played through them before. These videos where I ramble about video games are mainly about games that I am playing through for the first time, beyond like an hour or 2. And despite owning a Wii and the original game back when it came out, I, for whatever reason, only played a little bit of the original, so I wanted to replay the whole thing this time. I think back then I just wasn't as into video games, so I got the games I knew I would like, but I didn't really play them much. Either way, Super Mario Galaxy is considered by many to be one of the best Mario games, if not the best Mario game of all time. And I can certainly see why. I still think my favorite is Odyssey, but Galaxy is definitely up there. It's just super fun to play and has so many creative and inventive things going on all the time. It's basically just Mario in space. You run around planets with their own gravity and fly from planet to planet and do a bunch of spacey stuff, as well as some classic Mario platforming on more level playing fields. And the whole thing is just full of charm and fun. It's just a really well made Mario game with no real issues at all, really, that I can remember at least. It has a fantastic orchestral soundtrack as well, so that's pretty neat. It's different from most Mario games. And yeah, if you like Mario games and you haven't played Galaxy, it's a no-brainer. You should definitely play it. I really loved it. And after Super Mario Galaxy, I played a game that you may or may not have heard of. I'm not sure. Probably not. And that game was Among Us. So, chances are, if you're watching this video, you've at least heard of Among Us, or you've maybe seen my You Are the Imposter video based on Among Us. And if you're not familiar with Among Us, I'll quickly sum it up. It's a game where you and a group of other people, all real people, whether people you know or strangers, are tasked with running around a level either a space station type thing or a kind of sci-fi base. There are a few different things in Among Us that you can do. You and the group of people have to complete a simple series of tasks, things like connecting same-colored wires and playing games of Simon Says with a computer. But one of you, unbeknownst to the others, is an imposter, someone who is disguised as a crewmate but is actually a killer. And so you have to do these tasks while avoiding getting killed by the imposter, and whenever bodies are found, you have to call meetings to try and determine who the imposter is by way of discussion and voting. And it is a game that I think is incredibly fun with a group of people that you know already, especially over voice chat, because you can basically play around with what you all know about each other and the personalities that you're already familiar with to try and lie and deceive each other. And it's just very fun to play the different roles of the crewmates and the imposters. I will say that I don't think this game is that much fun if you're just playing over text chat, especially with strangers, but if you have some friends to play with and voice chat, it's incredibly fun, and no two games are ever the same. I will say that playing lots of Among Us got me through many parts of 2020 entertained and relaxed and socializing, even if over voice chat. So I am thankful for Among Us's existence. If you're interested in it and you haven't played it yet, it is free on mobile platforms like iPhone and Android, and $5, I believe, though it might be on sale on Steam, so I would recommend it. I think it might actually be on some other consoles as well, but I'm not sure. Great game though, Among Us. Next, I played a classic platformer from the Super Nintendo, and that was Donkey Kong Country. Now, I never had a Super Nintendo as a kid, but I played a little bit of Donkey Kong Country at a friend's house, and I always loved it then, despite only playing the first few levels. So I'd always wanted to eventually play through the whole game, and one day I realized that it is on the Nintendo Switch Online SNES Games Collection. So if you have Nintendo Switch Online, you can play this at no additional charge, so I can recommend that you go out and do it. But anyway, it's a classic platformer for a reason. It's very fun, it's a good level challenge without feeling unfair. Actually, harder than most games from that time, I think, at least in my opinion, from what I can remember. But a good type of hard, like, kind of reminded me a little bit of Cuphead's difficulty. Not quite as challenging as that, but a similar sort of sense of satisfaction when you finish levels and things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's not really much I can do to complain about it. It's a very, very good game, and classic for a reason. I thought it was interesting. I learned recently that the game was marketed as a 3D platformer back in its time, because the graphics are basically 3D rendered models shrunk down into pixelated sprites. And so while the game is not technically 3D, the graphics are based on 3D images, and it looks surprisingly good to this day. Obviously it doesn't actually look 3D, but it's got a very unique and colorful and detailed art style that I think is pretty cool. So yeah, recommend Donkey Kong Country if you like classic video games or 2D platformers and you haven't played it yet. Next, I played another classic game, but in a very different genre. And that game was Blood. The classic build engine FPS. It is in the same video game engine as Duke Nukem 3D, but it was much less well known, I believe, or at least it is today. That said, Blood is lesser known. I think it is perhaps even better than Duke Nukem 3D. I do prefer the vibe and style and humor and character that Duke Nukem 3D has, but as a shooter, Blood is perhaps even better. It is a very challenging game, almost too difficult at the higher difficulties, at least for me, but on the lower difficulties, I think it feels just right. You always feel like you have to think ahead of time and react quickly to things that are all around you or that could be around the corner, and I just found it very fun and satisfying to play. If you're not at all familiar with it, it's basically just an old school FPS where you run around trying to protect yourself or murder, depending on your perspective. Cultists, I think they're cultists, running around screaming gibberish at you and trying to shoot, stab, and blow you up. And it is, as the name of the game implies, a very bloody, graphic game, but in that old school kind of pixel art blood way that's not too over the top, it's just kind of cartoony. But yeah, if you're a fan of old school FPS games and you haven't played Blood, I would highly recommend it. I think it's mainly sold as Blood Fresh Supply nowadays, which is a version that I think just had some changes done to make it run better on modern systems and so on, but yeah, go play Blood. Next, I played a game called Dusk. And Dusk is a game that looks like an old school FPS, but in reality, it was made, I think, maybe somewhere between 1 and 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly. And it is one of many recent games that kind of tries to emulate old school FPS games, kind of bringing things back to basics while also having some modern charm of its own. And I think Dusk is a great game if you like simple, fast-paced shooters. It's basically a game where I think the story is somewhat similar to Blood. It was probably inspired by it, where you're running around trying to kill cult members who want to kill you. And it is a very fast-paced game. At points you're running around, sprinting and jumping all over the place while firing a shotgun way faster than you have any right to be firing a shotgun. And it's just a very fun, satisfying game to play, with a good level of challenge, but nothing too crazy. And I just think it's very fun. It feels almost like an arcade game in some ways. There's not really much else I have to say about it really, but if that sounds like your kind of thing, and you have not checked it out yet, I would highly recommend Dusk, a very fun FPS. And so next was another game that I made a video on, kind of, Astro's Playroom for the PlayStation 5. This was featured in my DualSense PS5 controller sounds video, where I showed off the interesting sounds of the haptic feedback motors in the PS5 controller. And this is a short but very sweet 3D platformer. It feels basically like like Sony's version of a 3D Mario game, and it's kind of celebrating PlayStation's history with a bunch of stuff themed to PlayStation and all the different consoles it's had. And it is a very, very fun game. It's very polished. The levels are short but sweet and have a lot of entertaining and fun stuff to do in them. Just jumping and attacking enemies and all that. I realize it's a game that kind of sounds lame to talk about, but playing it is just joyful, especially with the crazy haptic feedback from the PS5 controller, with things like the triggers tightening when you pull back bowstrings, or just like you can feel the footsteps from the left and right sides of the controller and things like that. It's a very tactile, sort of sensory experience, which is very cool, especially when you're not used to it for 3D platformers of all things. It is a very short game, and I platinumed it in just a few hours, but it is free with every PS5, so you can't really complain about the length. And I think it is a great example of a game not overstaying its welcome. Many games are too long, but I'd rather have a game that's too short than too long, if that makes sense. That's just my personal preference, though. Great game, though. And so next I played my first full-length PlayStation 5 game, or should I say PS3 game, because that game was the remake of Demon's Souls, which is a fantastic game. As some of you may know, I am a big fan of the Souls games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and so on. And in that whole series of games, kind of considered the same genre by From Software, the only one I never played was the original Demon's Souls, because by the time I was into the Souls games, I had already kind of put away my PS3, wasn't interested in getting it out and playing old games anymore, so I never got around to getting Demon's Souls. So when I heard that this was being remade with next generation graphics and everything, I was very excited. And this game, I will say for me, lived up to the hype. It feels closest to Dark Souls, but it has its own differences, particularly in the way the game is laid out. Instead of being one big open world like the other Souls games, it is a series of long levels with a few different sections in each. And I think that's an interesting change of pace. I wouldn't say that I prefer it. I think I prefer the open world stuff of the other games, but that aside, it feels just as much fun to play. And though the graphics are, of course, modern and beautiful, the gameplay itself, if I'm not mistaken, is basically just using the original code from the PS3 game under the hood. So, in theory, it should feel exactly the same to play. And I'm surprised at how well the gameplay holds up here. It does not feel clunky at all compared to the other Souls games, even though it was the first real Souls game. And if you're into the Souls games and you haven't played this one and you have a PS5, it is a must play. It is fantastic. And I had a great time with it. In terms of difficulty, I would say it is definitely a little easier than most of the Souls games, but it's still got quite a bit of challenge to it, so definitely not a walk in the park. But yeah, I loved the remake of Demon's Souls. Alright, so next I played my very first Yakuza game, and that is Yakuza mistaken, is the first in the Yakuza timeline in terms of chronological order, which is why I chose it mainly. But I had always heard good things about the Yakuza games, and so I decided to try one of them. And it is certainly a very unique game, and I like it a lot. I have not finished it yet because I got distracted with other stuff and haven't played it in a little while, but I do want to get back to it and finish it at some point. If you're not familiar at all with the Yakuza games, they're kind of, I guess you could call them small open world games where you're running around a city, doing basically a bunch of different missions as a member of the Yakuza in Japan. This one is set, I believe, in the 80s, and while it looks like a game that would be very serious and hardcore, it is kind of the opposite in many ways. The main story is primarily pretty serious and taken seriously, and very well done, I might add, so far. The stuff that you can do between the main story around the open world is just a wide variety of entertaining and sometimes very goofy stuff. It's a game that knows it's a video game and is not afraid to not take itself seriously sometimes. There are very many fun and funny things you can do in this game. I feel like I can't properly describe them. You can do everything from going to arcades to finding random people on the street with crazy, weird missions that you have to help them out with. Just like someone at one point is about to do a music video shoot and I think their producer is missing or something, and they just randomly ask you, hey, can you be the producer for this music video, despite you having zero experience? And as your character always reluctantly does, he agrees, and so you end up just doing goofy stuff, and it's a game that you can have a lot of silliness with, but also a lot of seriousness with. And I think it's very entertaining and unique and well made. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of the Grand Theft Auto series, but much smaller in scale. But I don't know, I'd like to finish playing this and maybe get around to some other Yakuza games someday, because I can certainly see why they have so many fans, and I'm glad that I gave it a try. And next, I played a game that, as you might be able to tell from the title, was a short game, not in a bad way, but just a short game. And that was a short hike, which is a game where you take a short hike. But honestly, it is a very, very charming and fun and relaxing game. I got it for free a while back on the Epic Games Store, as they like to give out a bunch of free games all the time. And I do not regret playing it at the price of free. In fact, I would probably pay a few bucks for it. It's not really the type of game that I go out of my way to play, but I found it to be very charming. It has a vibe a little bit like, it reminded me a bit of Animal Crossing, but also a little bit of Celeste in its kind of lo-fi pixel art aesthetic. But of course it is much, much, much easier than Celeste if you're familiar with that game. And it's a game where you're just on an island of sorts and you find a bunch of cute animal creatures to talk to. And you talk to them and they give you advice and items and things like that. And through a bunch of exploration and trial and error, you basically just have to climb your way to the top of the mountain on the island. And that's about it. But it's a very fun, relaxing game if you just want to chill out and have a simple goal to achieve in an hour or two, really. So yeah, I would recommend a short hike if it sounds interesting to you. Alright, so next next up, we have a game that has been all over the internet for many good reasons. And that game is, of course, Cyberpunk 2077. And as you can see here, I've got the infamous PlayStation 4 version. To be fair, I am playing it on a PlayStation 5, so it's not quite as bad, but this is an interesting product. So if you're not familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, it is the new game from CD Projekt Red, who basically achieved widespread acclaim with The Witcher 3. And this is a game that I believe was announced, 7 or 8 years ago? And ever since then they've been hyping it up and everyone's been losing their minds waiting for it and so on. So the hype levels for this game are pretty out of control. That said, even if the game could never live up to the hype, this game, for many people, did not live up to much of anything for a few reasons. Namely that it kind of feels, or more than kind of feels, unfinished. Now, let me tell you my perspective on the game. I never really got into The Witcher 3, it just wasn't really my type of game. And I didn't really have any interest in Cyberpunk. But when the game came out and I heard about all the bugs and crazy things, I have to admit, though I don't like financially supporting that type of thing, I was too curious, and I had to see for myself. So I went out and bought it, and I guess it might have been my low expectations or something, but I actually really like it. That said, I will not be playing much more of it right now, because I've decided, since the novelty of playing it brand new is kind of worn off, I'm going to wait for more updates and ideally the PlayStation 5 upgrade before I continue playing it, because I was just experiencing way too many crashes. Most of the bugs are pretty harmless in this game, just kind of funny visual stuff, but when the game crashes and you lose your progress and things like that, it just kind of gets annoying. So yeah, I guess to say a little more about this game, it's a very interesting and unique open world. I really like the setting. It's kind of futuristic and grungy and all that, as you would expect a cyberpunk game to be. And though I feel like it's maybe a little juvenile at times to its own detriment, it's not really a big deal. I just think it's a really elaborate, interesting place to explore, even when you're not really doing anything. I would kind of liken the vibe of the world to something between Blade Runner and Idiocracy, if that makes sense. Like, it's a mix of cool futuristic stuff and then just kind of stupid, on-the-nose satire of the potential future and how society can go. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about this game. I feel like a lot of it, even without the bugs, feels kind of unfinished. Like, the world is huge and full of places and things, but there's not really that much to do when you go beyond the surface. Like, it looks a lot deeper than it is, which, if I'm not mistaken, has been causing a lot of people disappointment and anger with the game. Understandably so, but I think because I set my expectations pretty low for it, I've been able to have a lot of fun with it, and I look forward to playing it when they inevitably do a lot more work on it, and it gets a bunch of updates and upgrades. But yeah, Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that I would say is heavily flawed with a lot of potential, and one day I do think that it will be a very good game. given the apparent history of The Witcher 3 and how that game apparently had a lot of upgrades and updates before it was as stable and good as it is today. So yeah, interesting game. And finally, the last game I played in 2020 was Hades. And Hades is a fantastic game. It wasn't my favorite of the year, but it's definitely up in the running. And if you're not familiar with Hades, it is a sort of roguelike, or I've seen it called roguelite game, where you play as Zagreus, son of Hades, as he attempts to escape the underworld. And every time you die, you start the game over to an extent, and the levels are randomly generated and so on, but every time you play, you get to keep certain upgrades and items and so on, so as you keep dying, you become more and more powerful, even if you have to start the game over from the beginning. So it makes it more palatable to me as someone who can get kind of bored of roguelikes when I have to keep doing the same things over and over again, because things are always slightly different and slightly more interesting when I have new power-ups and upgrades. And it is a very challenging game, but not impossibly hard. I will say that if you're not very good at action games, you might find it exceedingly difficult to clear the game, but there is a very cool mode called God Mode, and it's not a cheat. It's just a setting where you start with a little bit extra defense, and every time you die, they slightly up the defense, so the game becomes slightly easier every time. But it doesn't affect anything else in the game, and it's basically just like a difficulty setting, so I think that's pretty cool from an accessibility standpoint. And also pretty cool is just how much writing and voice acting there is in this game. This game has a ton of different Greek gods and figures from mythology and things like that, and they all have so many lines, and all the lines are voice acted. I cannot imagine how long it took to write and voice act for this game, because you're playing through it like dozens or hundreds of times, and even through all that, the characters you meet hardly ever say the same thing twice, and it just feels like they put so much effort into it that I have to commend it, because it is very good at immersing you in the world and the story, and seeing as all the characters change and interact with each other throughout the different parts of the story as you keep playing the same trials and tribulations over and over again. So I feel like it's a roguelike that solves a lot of the problems, per se, of roguelikes. Not that those things are necessarily problems, but for someone who might be turned off by them, this game provides some stuff that is interesting beyond the core gameplay, and I think it's a brilliant game for that. So yeah, Hades I would highly recommend if you're into action games at all. Alright, so that about does it for the games I played during the second half of 2020, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.